It's time now for Uncancelled, always a highlight of the show where we tackle stories that other broadcasters shy away from. And tonight, things go from bad to worse in Australia as a zero-COVID policy continues to leave the country in a state of COVID paralysis with endless lockdowns in spite of incredibly low case numbers and deaths. Efforts to control public behaviour seem to be becoming increasingly draconian. Take a look at this bizarre video of the Chief Health Officer of New South Wales, Dr. Kerry Chant.
Whilst it is in human nature to engage in conversation with others, to be friendly, unfortunately, this is not the time to do that. So even if you run into your next door neighbour in the shopping centre, in the Coles, whilst you're at Coles or Woolworths or Aldi or any other grocery shop, don't start up a conversation.
I mean, dystopian stuff. I love Australia, but what the hell is going on down under? Joining me now to discuss this is Sophie Elsworth, media writer at the Australian newspaper. Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm amazed that you're so fully dressed and well presented, given the fact that it's about 8 in the morning down under.
Oh, look, Mark, well, there's not much else to do down here. I mean, I'm in Melbourne and we're now in our 5th lockdown, Mark. We're up to day 183 in harsh lockdown here in Melbourne. We've got half of the Australian population in lockdown. We've got Sydney in lockdown, we've got Adelaide in lockdown and Melbourne in lockdown. And yesterday we had about 160 new cases. But that's enough to get these chief medical officers in a state of absolute flux and lock us all in our houses. So we've been restricted to what we can do, Mark, and there's not a lot to do here. We're in the middle of winter and it's about 5 degrees outside.
It's a devastating situation, and also chilling words from that health spokesperson there. Don't talk to your neighbours.
I mean, Mark, can you believe the nonsense that they're telling us down here in Australia? I mean, the other day we heard Kerry Chant say, no browsing. You cannot be browsing when you're in the supermarket. We've had some absolutely absurd things we've been told here. We had the health minister in Queensland telling us earlier in the year that you actually, must be driving around in your vehicle with a mask on, even if you are on your own. I mean, the stuff they are telling us is just nonsense. And crazily enough, people are abiding by these ridiculous directions that they're being told.
So do you think that the authorities in Australia are pursuing a zero-COVID strategy?
Absolutely, Mark. I mean, I think the whole strategy here in Australia is to eradicate COVID, to completely get rid of it, and at any cost. We have had so many lockdowns here, Mark, but the problem that we face in Australia that you don't face so much in the UK is we only have about 15% of the adult population double vaccinated at this stage. Vaccination has been slow here in Australia, but every time we have a lockdown, the first thing the politicians or the bureaucrats do, Mark, is point to the UK and go, look what's happening there. Look at their case numbers. Look at their death toll. So you guys are in a way the basket case that we constantly refer to down here in Australia in order to make it seem that our restrictions are absolutely the right thing to do.
Yes, and of course you mentioned, less than 200 daily cases in Australia, and we've got a Prime Minister who's prepared to continue to allow us to freely go about our lives with some restrictions, but accepting the idea of 100,000 cases a day and still not locking down.
Well, that's not the case here with Scott Morrison, Mark. I mean, any whiff of someone getting a cough or sneezing, they panic. In Melbourne last year, we had a lockdown that lasted 120 days, and that was an absolute nightmare. We had people locked down for so long, and the government here in Melbourne are concerned that we will go through that again. So with this latest Delta strain, the strategy is the moment they get a case, lock us down. But Mark, this is taking so much of a toll here in Australia. We're a hermit kingdom. You cannot get into Australia. It's virtually impossible. We have about 35,000 Australians trying to get home. They can't. And anyone brave enough to leave Australia is certainly brave, because it's so difficult to be able to get back in here with limited hotel quarantine facilities that we have, and numbers that each state is taking each day into their hotel quarantine.
Is there much anti-lockdown sentiment within Australia? How compliant have the Australian people been?
Well, Mark, I think people are starting to get jack of it now. Yesterday in Sydney and Melbourne, we had mass protests in the city that drew thousands of people saying enough is enough. They want businesses back open. But there is also a lot of people here, Mark, who think lockdown is normal. And there's also a large contingency, Mark, of the media here who are on full salaries, haven't lost a scrap of pay, and are cheering for lockdowns. They're saying that Sydney's lockdown should be harder and harsher. And, you know, Mark, we've got businesses that are going to the wall here. We've got a lot of people who are battling, yet we've got a lot of the media and certainly the politicians and bureaucrats saying lockdown is absolutely essential.
And how is the economy doing? Is there a concern about the national debt, about unemployment?
Mark, could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, how is the economy doing? Is there a concern about the impact of these strict lockdowns on the economy and issues like unemployment?
So the economy, interestingly enough, is going quite well here in Australia. We've got unemployment under 5%, which is our lowest level that we've had in about 10 years, should I say.
Right.
So the economy is bubbling along. House prices are going well. We seem to have a lot of people back in work, but we haven't got a lot of businesses who are struggling to get staff, Mark. We rely on overseas people to come into Australia and help with things such as the hospitality industry, fruit picking, various industries. We don't have them anymore. So some businesses have got signs up urging people, have we got workers? Can you come and work for us? It's a real battle to get workers here in Australia.
And why has the vaccine rollout been so slow?
Sorry, Mark, it just dropped out.
No problem at all. Sophie, why has the vaccine rollout been so slow in Australia?
Well, the issue here, Mark, is the federal government getting access to supplies of the vaccine. There's also been a lot of hesitancy about the vaccine. AstraZeneca's got very bad press here, and there's been mixed advice on whether or not to get it. So a lot of people are waiting for Pfizer. The hesitancy is definitely an issue. Getting access to the vaccine is definitely an issue. And overall, our vaccine rates are well behind a lot of other countries.
We know that Australia is one of the most spirited and optimistic and positive countries in the world. It's very entrepreneurial, fantastic culture, business. You know, it's a remarkable country and, of course, a great ally of the UK. Are you concerned about the impact on the mental health of Australians after all these lockdowns?
Absolutely, Mark. I mean, we've got kids now that can't go to school. They're sitting at home homeschooling with their parents, trying to decipher what is going on in their curriculum. There's a lot of people who are struggling. They've been locked down for so long, but it seems to be lockdowns come at any cost. And mental health is not a priority when it comes to eradicating the virus. And we're not hearing about these cases like we should.
So what's going to happen, Sophie? What's your prediction about the sort of medium-term future for Australia in relation to the pandemic? Do you think it's lockdowns for months to come?
Sadly, Mark, I do. I feel that lockdown is the only lever we can pull at the moment. And like I said, Mark, they're just so concerned that we are going to have a spread of COVID. We've kept the COVID cases in Australia down pretty well. Overall, in the whole pandemic, we've had about 910 deaths overall. So our death rate is very low. We've handled it quite well, but these lockdowns are coming at all costs and they're hurting a lot of people, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a crazy situation. Sophie, can you just finally give me a flavour of how strict the lockdown is? I mean, how limited is life under these measures? What can you and can't you do?
Well, Mark, the rules keep changing so much, but right
Sounds
now
familiar.
in Melbourne, it's it's masks indoors, outdoors. You know, who's caught COVID outdoors in fresh air on a walk?
So
on
you
their
have
own?
to wear a
Shops are
mask
closed.
when you're in a park or walking down the street.
Absolutely, Mark. I mean, absolutely.
And
you see people,
mask,
as I said,
is mask compliance being followed? Are people following the rules with regard to face coverings?
well, here in Melbourne, Mark, people are sick of it. There's half of the population, I'd say, here that follow every rule by the book, and the other half that have just said enough is enough. There's no science to this nonsense. They're starting to get tired of being told constantly what to do, Mark.
And how are they being received by the authorities? If they're not wearing a mask or ignoring the COVID rules, are there too many of them for the cops to control?
Well, interestingly, during this lockdown, I haven't seen the police out in force as much as we have in lockdown 1, 2, 3 and 4. I mean, in the suburb that I live in, Mark, we had police on horse patrol monitoring streets. We had the riot squad, rallying up people or trying to shoo them out of the city when we had protests. But we also had some crazy things here, Mark. We had the Black Lives Matter protests where we had 10,000 people marching in the streets of Melbourne, and that seemed to be okay to those running this place. I mean, the contradictions, and it seems to be whatever cause is, it determines whether the police enforce the rules or not. They've become effectively political police.
Fascinating stuff. Sophie, thank you very much for joining us, and I wish you well, and I hope you're able to escape lockdown as soon as possible. Sophie Elsworth is a media writer at the Australian newspaper.